Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. It is those who know little, and not those who know much, who so positively assert that this or that problem will never be solved by science. A man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. A man's friendships are one of the best measures of his worth. The love for all living creatures is the most noble attribute of man. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, not the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change. It is impossible to conceive of this immense and wonderful universe as the result of blind chance or necessity. We stopped looking for monsters under our bed when we realized that they were inside us. I am not apt to follow blindly the lead of other men. I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created parasitic wasps with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars. The highest possible stage in moral culture is when we recognize that we ought to control our thoughts. Even people who aren't geniuses can outthink the rest of mankind, if they develop certain thinking habits. How paramount the future is to the present when one is surrounded by children. A moral being is one who is capable of reflecting on his past actions and their motives, of approving of some and disapproving of others. Besides love and sympathy, animals exhibit other qualities connected with the social instincts which in us would be called moral. To kill an error is as good a service as, and sometimes even better than the establishing of a new truth or fact. Great is the power of steady misrepresentation. Keep steadily in mind that each organic being is striving to increase, that each at some period of its life has the struggle for life, and suffer great destruction. The war of nature is not incessant. The vigorous, the healthy, and the happy survive and multiply. The most important factor in survival is neither intelligence nor strength but adaptability. The world will not be inherited by the strongest, it will be inherited by those most able to change. It is not the biggest, the brightest, or the best that will survive, but those who adapt the quickest. One general law, leading to the advancement of all organic beings, namely, multiply, vary, let the strongest live and weakest die. As man advances in civilization, and small tribes are united into larger communities, the simplest reason would tell each individual that he ought to extend his social instincts and sympathies to all members of the same nation, though personally unknown to him. This point being once reached, there is only an artificial barrier to prevent his sympathies extending to the men of all nations and races. This preservation of favorable variations and the rejection of injurious variations, I call natural selection or the survival of the fittest. In the long history of humankind, and animal kind, too, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. Man tends to increase at a greater rate than his means of subsistence. A scientific man ought to have no wishes, no affections, a mere heart of stone. On the ordinary view of each species having been independently created, we gain no scientific explanation. False facts are highly injurious to the progress of science, for they often endure long, but false views, if supported by some evidence, do little harm, for everyone takes a salutary pleasure in proving their falseness. Intelligence is based on how efficient a species became at doing the things they need to survive. I love fools' experiments. I am always making them. I am turned into a sort of machine for observing facts and grinding out conclusions. Such simple instincts as bees making a beehive could be sufficient to overthrow my whole theory. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been, and are being, evolved. Blushing is the most peculiar and most human of all expressions. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one. The young and the old of widely different races, both with man and animals, express the same state of mind by the same movements. The very essence of instinct is that it's followed independently of reason. We are always slow in admitting any great change of which we do not see the intermediate steps. The mystery of the beginning of all things is insoluble by us, and I for one must be content to remain an agnostic. The survival of preservation of certain favored words in the struggle for existence is natural selection. Building a better mousetrap merely results in smarter mice. Natural selection almost inevitably causes much extinction of the less improved forms of life and induces what I have called divergence of character. It is so important to bear in mind the probability of conversion from one function to another. But a plant on the edge of a desert is said to struggle for life against the drought, though more properly it should be said to be dependent upon the moisture. What wretched doings come from the ardor of fame! The love of truth alone would never make one man attack another bitterly. If it wasn't for seasickness, all the world would be sailors. If the misery of our poor be caused not by the laws of nature, but by our institutions, great is our sin. Freedom of thought is best promoted by the gradual illumination of men's minds which follows from the advance of science. A fair result can be obtained only by fully stating and balancing the facts and arguments on both sides of each question. I am like a gambler, and love a wild experiment. Free will is to mind what chance is to matter.